Hello, welcome to Feel the Psychology podcast. I'm Dr. Ashleigh, and today I'm joined by my good friend Pamela, who is a psychology lecturer in Glasgow, Scotland. So today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about dyscalculia, and we're going to touch on briefly just that how dyscalculia appears to be a neurodivergent diagnosis that tends to be actually underdiagnosed, and we don't tend to know an awful lot about this, and we're not quite there in the same way that we are with our understanding of dyslexia. So we just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about dyscalculia today. So Pamela, I was wondering if you could just, I suppose, share your thoughts and on dyscalculia, like where we are at to how it compares with dyslexia and the research that we know, and how we go about assessing for that.
Absolutely, Ashleigh. Thank you so much. So I suppose, in terms of dyscalculia, you're absolutely correct in comparison to dyslexia, because the research is actually 30 years behind in terms of... 30 years behind, roughly 3 decades in terms of the research for our knowledge and understanding of dyscalculia in comparison to dyslexia. That is a phenomenal time period.
Yes.
And that means that there's significant delays in terms of our knowledge, our understanding, our interventions, diagnosing, as well as in treatments and methods for moving forward. Obviously, there's no treatment as such to be neurodivergent, but it's important that we have these strategies in place to make life a little bit easier. I suppose there is a common myth about dyscalculia. Ashleigh, do you want to tell us what that common myth is?
Yeah, I suppose it's that idea of thinking of dyscalculia can simply be described as, it's the dyslexia, but for numbers.
Yeah, and the thing is, Ashleigh, it's a specific and persistent difficulty in understanding numbers. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, dyslexia for numbers, if you will. And in terms of the estimated percentage, it's like 25% have a math learning difficulty caused by either neurodiverse conditions such as dyslexia or external factors, and there are lots of external factors to consider. But it's important to notice and to recognise that you can be dyslexic and not have dyscalculia, but equally you can have dyscalculia and not be dyslexic, but you can have dyscalculia and be dyslexic. So it's important to recognise that as its own condition.
Absolutely. It's not person. Absolutely.
It's not it's certainly not a bracket or a number. No. Certainly it's its own condition. And there are many characteristics that are found in people with dyscalculia, and there are certainly difficulties with numbers that are persistent, like we've already spoken about there. And they've been there since a younger age. It's not something that they certainly develop, essentially, much later in life. Difficulties in applying, these are older terms, but very much arithmetic, but not necessarily to the other areas of maths, such as geometry and algebra. So certain aspects of math, essentially, difficulties in maths, but not necessarily in subjects such as English. So any subject that doesn't involve, numbers, you certainly wouldn't associate that with dyscalculia. And then there's that lack of intuitive understanding of numbers and simple number concepts. For example, the relationship between multiplication and repetitive addition subjects. There's the lack of a fundamental understanding of how numbers relate to each other. Certainly for example, the number 6, and that can be made up in various forms, for like 5 plus 1, and then another format. How could you make up to the number 6? And it's that difficulty in understanding how do you get to that. So there's certainly difficulty with when you're talking about numbers, and certainly addition and how you get to that total. Sticking to budgets is really difficult. Yeah. So if you're thinking financially, and if you're little and you're younger, your pocket money starting off really young there, but as an adult, we have a lot of responsibilities. Our mortgages, our finances, our pensions, wages on a month-to-month basis. These are all things to take into consideration. And simple units, so measuring volumes, measuring time, and that can be interchangeable. The concept of time can be interchangeable with the dyslexia as well, and that's where people do get confused and can have that misconception. But I suppose with dyscalculia as well, it's certainly younger children that you would notice difficulties with the counting aspect of it. It's a classic one. Using your fingers to count is very easy, and it's a good visual that you can see. And pattern spotting, noticing where patterns lie when you're given the sheets of paper, or if you're doing a task or you're doing a challenge. Then seeing that pattern and recognising that pattern can be really difficult. And certainly something that is more increasing is and spoken quite a lot about, but not necessarily associated as dyscalculia, is having that math anxiety.
Yes, and that is absolutely massive. Like we see that time and time again, and it's interesting because even like you might have you come across so many people. I have so many friends that even now as adults, you know, when it does come to even simple things like you're out for a meal, the bill comes at the end, and we've got to calculate, right, okay, so what's everyone paying? And some people just actually freeze, and, you know, they pass over the bill to somebody, I'm not good with maths, and it's this almost like this automatic response.
Absolutely.
And a complete shutdown, and it's like that, okay, I'm not even going to attempt. Like even with the use of, even today, you know, that old one about, remember maths teachers, we used to always say at school, like, you won't always have your calculator with you. Yes. But nowadays we tend to have, exactly.
All the time.
So we tend to have our calculators with us. But it's interesting that even with the help of a calculator, it's interesting. I see it with adults, and it's very much like, I'm not very good with numbers, and I'm not very good, and so they don't want to. And I suppose there's a lot more to it than I suppose just that. I suppose there's so much more, but people might not want to make a mistake, and obviously if other people are paying and things like that, I suppose there's additional anxiety there. But it's something I notice quite a lot. With people that they have maybe described that they have got anxiety with like numbers and maths. Personally speaking, I've got my own maths anxiety. I didn't do too well at maths at school. I tried very hard. I went to all the supported study groups. I went to Saturday clubs for maths. I did a lot of time of trying to improve when it came to maths. And despite that, I failed maths and resat the test, the exam the following year, and also failed that as well. So that's my own personal thing. So I suppose it is interesting. I can relate a lot to this actually. I suppose I probably have got my own maths anxiety, my worried about when it comes to numbers.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, Ashleigh, like you say, like it's owning that as well. Yeah. And I think dyscalculia is so underspoken about. Yeah, we quite happily speak about dyslexia. And that has certainly became more common with big names associated with dyslexia associations in various countries. But with dyscalculia, it's almost that taboo, it's almost that embarrassment that you can't add something up. Yeah. And people are more inclined to laugh at you if you can't do that basic addition or that basic subtraction. And we're all really good at saying, you should be able to do that mental math that we talk about. But that's incredibly intimidating when you are on the spot trying to come up with an answer. And
then you've got the pressure, the social pressure, the feeling self-conscious, and you know where it's like then your brain just switches down, it just shuts down.
It's that fight or flight and freeze moment.
And that you cannot think and you cannot calculate. So,
no. And it's hugely embarrassing, and I think it's really important that there are all these challenges with dyscalculia, but also recognising that dyscalculia people are neurodivergent as well. Yeah. But they also come with these creative skills.
Yes. So similar to what we've mentioned before. Yeah.
Absolutely. So creative, artistic, really strategic thinkers can come into play. There's a love of words. Okay. It's removing that math barrier and focusing more on the literacy aspect of it. If you are dyscalculia without having dyslexia, then you might be exceptional spellers and have amazing grammar in your sentence structure. Very intuitive thinkers, and great at organisational skills. So you're planning that, you're organising it, you're getting that methodical without having that pressure of doing the basic math skills, if you will. So it can be incredibly challenging, especially when we are dealing with a diagnosis that doesn't get the same input, the same research, the same response as all the other neurodiversity conditions.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing, Pamela. I'm just wondering, in terms of like people that we might recognise, or, you know, famous names and things like that, have you got some examples of people that we might know who have dyscalculia?
Actually, yes. So these are people that have actually spoken themselves. So they've confirmed their own diagnosis, whether that has been a confirmed diagnosis or not. But they've spoken openly about their challenges. So we've got singers such as Robbie Williams, Cher, and Mick Hucknall, and we've got the likes of Bill Gates. Bill Gates, and the one and only Benjamin Franklin.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, fantastic. That's interesting. I must say that there was some names on that list that I was surprised to hear. So yeah, that's really interesting. And I think as well, like, again, I suppose it comes back to like the previous podcast we recorded on like dyslexia. We talked about the famous people that have dyslexia, and there was some surprises there also. And I think actually that can be helpful to so many people, just that they recognise these names, and they recognise that actually, do you know what, they might have the same experiences or similar experiences with the difficulties such as having dyscalculia. So I think that's actually really helpful. So just before we end today, I was just wondering, are there any further points that you'd like to add?
Absolutely, Ashleigh, and thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you. Just very, very briefly on dyscalculia. And I think it's important that the final take-home points for today is that it's incredibly under-researched.
Yes.
So, and the key players, yes, there's these famous names that we can all associate to, that there is this taboo aspect still, and I think that the more barriers that are broken down, the more experiences that we share, and the more research that's conducted, we'll know more about dyscalculia and how that impacts on our day-to-day life.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you.